What's going down, guys? This is TK coming at you with a chance to open your mind, expand your horizons, and hopefully get you to see some things in a different light. Now, a lot of us can agree that we don't do things unless we want to, and we don't participate in things unless we understand them. So it's late. I've been studying, and they say that if you truly understand something, you can explain it in a simplistic way. So I've been looking at our economic system, and mainly my interactions with people in general is that America's on a full stream tugboat. Everything's moving fast forward, and that the economy is increasing, getting better, getting stronger. I think the numbers that's put out is inflation is at around 2%. Unemployment is around, 5%. And new jobs have been created. Now I'm quoting Television and, spin agencies here. But that's what everybody believes. The propaganda machine works. They took a hint from Joseph Goebbels in the last World War, and they mastered the psychological aspect of the Whirlwitzer, the spin machine. So the agencies that be have everyone believing those factors, right? But the factors that I try to point out are a verifiable reality that very few people willing to acknowledge. And, it's contrary to popular belief, but there's another side of the coin. There's always two sides to a coin. So let's talk about the flip side, the tails. Now, a lot of people are afraid to talk about tails because they say, oh, you're doom and gloom and you're talking about negativity. But at some point, you need to acknowledge reality, make decisions based on that information, and then factor that into your future planning, because to ignore reality and act like your head in the sand, it doesn't benefit you in the long run, okay? So the flip side of the coin is the external factors to our system. In other words, our system is systemically a Ponzi scheme that involves manipulation of the dollar. All of our numbers are inflated. All of our presented factual data is calculated in such a way in which it presents the pretty side. So in other words, it's a mirror that's slanted so that you only see a certain angle. That's the nature of our system. So when we say the systemic nature of the system is designed to fail, it is pointing to the fact that the majority of our system is propped up by numbers that aren't real. The plunge protection team does an excellent job at creating bubbles, and those bubbles are inflated sub-realities that has nothing to do with factual side of base currency, M1, and actual representation of the ebb and flow of our economic system. So how does that affect you? Well, on the surface, it doesn't affect you because what you see, you're happy about. You're happy about the numbers that the spin factor, the Whirlwitzer throws at you, right? You're happy about low gas prices, because you don't understand the base nature of the entire economic system. So if you describe our economic system as what it is, and you look at the financial system in terms of how it's actually being driven, then what you realize is that mathematically we cannot get to a critical tipping point in the scale and not tip over. Okay? That's just the nature of a weighed balance. You know, at some point, the number gets to a critical statistic, and that statistic tips the scale. So if you talk about $19 trillion in debt, that's a factor on our mathematical scale. If you talk about the fact that America has always exported our inflation, because everybody talks about that. Well, we don't see inflation. We're never going to see hyperinflation. That's because as a country, we've always exported our inflation by dollarization of the world. And what that means is that we have become the base currency for other currencies and other countries through suggestion, manipulation, and force. So the plunge protection team has done a very good job, or I should say the ESF has done a very good job in terms of monetize or dollarization of the world. So that's what allows us to export our inflation. But here's a problem that no one's speaking of, or very few people are speaking of, the fact that the foreign parties, sovereign nations that used to utilize the dollar as a primary exchange source, are now starting to walk away from it. So internationally, the dollar is losing faith and confidence. A lot of sovereign nations are actually subverting the dollar and coming up with alternate systems that do not use the dollar, especially in international trade swaps. So that affects inflation, because them buying U.S. Treasury bonds actually prevents that inflation from hitting the United States of America, because those dollars are offshore. But what happens if the sovereign nations outside of the United States stop using the dollar and flee away from it in international trade? Then those unused dollars, what? Come back home. And what does a surplus of money that is no longer being used internationally coming back to the U.S. do to the base currency M1 that's already in the United States? Okay, so sovereign nations doing international trade outside of the dollar is one of the external factors. Another factor in the result of the Bretton Woods Agreement is the petrodollar agreement with Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia being the head of the table, the king at the round table, has always sort of controlled OPEC. And when the petrodollar was fat, there was no problems in terms of $100 a barrel. But now we're looking at sub $20 barrel oil. So what is that doing to OPEC? How is the OPEC nations running on surplus when you're looking at $20 barrel oil when you're used to $100 barrel oil? Well, now you have an external factor like Iran that used to have an embargo, prevention from participation in the market, now entering the market with cheaper to produce or less expensive to bring to market oil. And it's going to enter the market for the first time. And then you have sovereign nations doing direct contract deals with Iran to get that free oil in terms of customer signups and customer waiting. So what does that do to OPEC? And more importantly, what does that do to the Petro agreement that says any nation in the world must trade oil in dollars? Well, now sovereign nations are saying, I'm going to trade oil in other than US dollar denominations. So all of that means that the strength of the dollar is a farce. And that what you've been presented is a lie. So the solution to the problem is to get out of the banking system, get out of the dollar altogether, and switch to alternative currency, become a multimillionaire in alternative currency while the dollar is still not falling off the cliff. And if you do that, you have a viable chance in moving forward. Because one thing I want to point out is that money never dies. It always just transfers to another medium. And every recession, there is a wealth transfer. It's just that money is quickly moving away from you or money is quickly moving towards you. So you have to decide what position you want to be on by personal choice and action. Someone said that there's always money to be made when there's blood on the streets. And that means, as my father used to tell me, there's opportunity in chaos. But you have to position and be well prepared in order to survive this upcoming crisis, which will be 2008 on steroids.